Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. In the heart of the Idaho wilderness, one man sought peace and found war. When a ruthless HOA tried to steal his land with forged maps, trespassing parties, and legal traps, he didn't back down. He documented everything and fought back. This is how he crushed them. I pulled off the gravel road onto the winding dirt trail that cut through the pine forest like an old scar. The gate creaked open just as I remembered, rusty, stubborn, but honest, and I drove through slowly, letting the silence of the mountains soak into my bones. It had been nearly 6 months since I closed on the place, but this was the first week I had more than 48 hours to enjoy it. 14 acres of lakeside wilderness with a collapsing fishing cabin, a crooked dock, and a view that didn't need fixing. It was mine. No HOA, no meetings about grass height, no pastel-colored mailbox restrictions, just trees, water, and freedom. A different kind of peace. The first 2 days were everything I had imagined when I signed that deed. I spent the mornings surveying the structural bones of the old cabin and taking notes on what could be salvaged. The evenings were whiskey by the fire pit and coyotes singing backup. By the third day, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt like something close to healing. That was, of course, the day the bullshit began. I came down to the dock around 10 in the morning, coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other, ready to check the rot under the planks. What I found instead were 2 beach towels flapping in the breeze like flags of occupation. A pair of cheap plastic flip-flops sat neatly beside an open soda can, and nearby, this part really made me laugh, someone had hammered a laminated sign into one of my dock posts. It read, "Shared access for residents of Woodhaven HOA. At first, I thought maybe someone was playing a joke. I even looked around to see if a friend had shown up unannounced to mess with me. But the trail was empty. No cars, no footprints. Just the stink of entitlement. I yanked the sign down and tossed the towels onto the shore like they were biohazards. Then I went back up to the cabin to check the camera feed. I'd installed a basic trail cam on the main path just in case wildlife or humans got curious. Nothing since last night. By noon, I figured the weird little episode was over, until I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel and a dark silver SUV eased past the trees like it owned the place. It parked near the turnaround point, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd been ripped straight out of a corporate HR manual. Blazer, heels, oversized sunglasses, and a name badge that sparkled in the sun like a tiny weaponized shield. She marched up to me, clipboard in hand, and introduced herself with a smile that could crack drywall. "Karen Strong, president of the Woodhaven Homeowners Association. You must be Matthew Eldridge." I didn't answer right away. I just gave her the kind of slow nod men give when they're trying to figure out how deep in the swamp they just stepped. "I noticed some confusion this morning," she continued, glancing over my shoulder toward the now towel-free dock. "I just wanted to clarify that our community has agreed to allow residents lakeside access for events and recreational use. It's an easement issue. You understand, of course." "No," I said. "I don't." Her smile dimmed slightly, like someone just turned down the thermostat on her charm. "The water is a shared natural resource, Mr. Eldridge. The right to access it doesn't mean the right to walk through my land to get to it," I cut in, letting my voice drop. "This property isn't part of your HOA. I didn't sign a thing, and I'm not giving up a square inch of shoreline." Karen blinked. For a split second I saw it, the flicker of irritation behind her eyes. Then the smile returned, all sweetness and strategic Botox. "Well, we'll see what the county says. There's a lot of administrative gray area with legacy properties like yours, but I wanted to approach this neighbor to neighbor." "Then consider this the neighborly answer," I said, stepping closer. "Stay off my land. I don't care what rules you think you voted on. You don't make them here." Karen's smile finally collapsed into a thin line. "Very well, but I'd hate for this to escalate unnecessarily. The association does have resources, and we've been recognized by the county before in similar—" I held up a hand. "This conversation's over." She left without another word, but not without scanning the property like she was appraising it for confiscation. I watched her SUV disappear through the trees and stood there for a long moment afterward, heart rate steady, breath slow. I'd spent years engineering complex systems in combat zones, mapping tunnels, detecting sabotage, building walls that couldn't be breached. What I'd just encountered wasn't a skirmish, it was a probe. And something told me the next move wasn't going to be nearly as polite. The next morning started with a sound I didn't recognize, something between a bark and a shout. I stepped out of the cabin with my coffee and froze when I saw a teenage boy in swim trunks sprinting past my fire pit, followed by a shaggy golden retriever who clearly thought this was some kind of game. Behind them, another kid, maybe 16, stood at the edge of the dock, already knee-deep in the lake, yelling something about the water being cold as balls. I didn't recognize any of them. I walked down slowly, boots crunching over gravel and pine needles, and the moment the kid with the dog noticed me, he froze like a raccoon caught stealing chicken eggs. "Hey!" I called out, not bothering to raise my voice. "This somebody's idea of a field trip?" The taller one in the water looked over his shoulder, squinting. "Karen said it was cool. She has the key." I blinked. "What key?" "The gate. The one by the trail. She unlocked it last week." I didn't answer. I turned, walked back up to the cabin, unlocked the supply shed, and pulled out a bolt cutter and a brand new padlock from the hardware run I'd done yesterday. Then I grabbed my trail cam's SD card, plugged it into my laptop, and fast-forwarded through the feed. At 2 in the morning, 2 days ago, headlights, a car I didn't recognize. A woman in a light jacket, looked like Karen, walked up to the old steel gate, fiddled with it, and popped it open. That same morning, the latch had been twisted and bent out of shape. I'd chalked it up to rust. Now I had a timestamp and a face. By noon, the kids were gone, probably spooked by my silence. I replaced the busted lock with a heavy-duty commercial one and mounted a second camera facing the trail from a high branch. I installed 2 new signs, both laminated and screwed into posts. Private property, no trespassing, not affiliated with Woodhaven HO. I then sat down and typed up a formal cease and desist letter addressed to the HOA and to Karen personally, citing unlawful entry, unauthorized use of private property, and criminal trespassing under Idaho Code Title 18. I printed it, signed it, and drove it into town to send via certified mail with delivery confirmation. That should have been the end of it. But HOA types like Karen, they treat escalation like an Olympic sport. 2 days later, I received an envelope in the mail. Not from Karen. This one had the letterhead of the Woodhaven Homeowners Association, complete with an official-looking watermark of a pine tree and a lake. I guess that's what they think branding looks like. Inside was a typed double-spaced letter from a legal firm out of Boise, claiming that, as per the administrative resolutions of the HOA Board and its recognized advisory authority, the shoreline area adjacent to my property had historically been used as a shared recreational access zone, and that continued obstruction may constitute a violation of community standards subject to enforcement. I read the damn thing 3 times, trying not to laugh. Obstruction, community standards. I lived off a forest road half a mile from their nearest street. The only thing separating us was the fact that I had paperwork, and they had entitlement. I forwarded the letter to my attorney, a no-bullshit woman named Cheryl, who once successfully sued a real estate developer for burying construction waste under a children's park. She called me 30 minutes later and said, "This is garbage. Their HOA has no jurisdiction over your land, but if they're willing to pretend they do on paper, I wouldn't be surprised if they try something more aggressive." She was right. That Saturday, I caught movement on my cameras around 7 in the morning. A man in cargo shorts and a fishing vest had parked near the trail gate, no idea how he got the code, and was walking down with a little boy, tackle box in hand. I intercepted them politely and explained that the dock wasn't open to the public. "But Karen said," he began. "Karen doesn't own this land," I said. "I do." "You're trespassing," he shrugged, muttered something about community agreements, and turned back with the boy. I watched them walk off, then spent the next 2 hours checking every corner of my perimeter. That evening, my motion-activated floodlights tripped. I reviewed the footage and saw a group of adults, 6 of them, trying to squeeze through a gap in the fence by the lake. They didn't even try to hide. One woman had a folding chair on her back like she was heading to a beach bonfire. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I did what I was trained to do: document, record, anticipate. The next morning, I ordered aerial imaging of the property to establish exact GPS-stamped borders. I scheduled a surveyor to remap the land with modern equipment. I installed cellular backup for my camera system and added signage in Spanish, just in case someone later claimed they didn't understand the warnings. Then I started building my own file, printouts, timestamps, photos, footage. Everything logged, everything dated, because this wasn't about one nosy neighbor anymore. This was about war by bureaucracy. The letter from the county showed up 5 days later, folded in thirds and tucked neatly inside a bland white envelope that somehow managed to feel both official and dismissive at the same time. I opened it standing by the truck, coffee thermos under one arm, crowbar in the other. I'd been halfway through pulling up the rotten floorboards in the cabin when I noticed the envelope tucked in the mailbox. The first thing that caught my eye was the phrase, "Notice of Parcel Review and Adjustment Request." My gut twisted. According to the document, an application had been submitted to the Valley County Land Services Office requesting a reassessment of my parcel boundaries. The claim that a portion of my property, specifically the waterfront strip between my dock and the tree line, was part of a community green space historically designated for public recreation by none other than the Woodhaven Homeowners Association. I stood there in the crisp mountain air, paper trembling slightly in my hand, and realized they weren't just pushing with words anymore. They were coming for the land itself. I didn't wait. I threw the paper on the passenger seat, drove straight into Cascade, and walked into the Land Services office like I owned the building. Because damn it, I sure as hell owned that shoreline. The woman at the front desk, Jennifer by her nameplate, gave me a polite smile that immediately faltered when I dropped the letter on the counter and said, "I need to speak to whoever approved this crap." To her credit, she didn't bristle. Instead, she picked up the letter, gave it a quick scan, and motioned for me to follow. We ended up in a back office with a man named Curtis, a planning supervisor who looked like he spent most of his weekends ice fishing and drinking off-brand beer. He studied the letter, then pulled up my parcel records on his monitor. Curtis squinted at the screen. "This doesn't look right. It's marked as independent, not part of any subdivision." "Exactly," I said. "I have the original deed, notarized maps, title insurance. Hell, I've even got aerial GPS overlays. There's no easement, no green zone, no shared lakefront." He leaned back, arms folded. "The request came with a supplemental document package. That's what triggered the review. I asked to see the documents." He obliged. Inside the packet, submitted by the HOA's legal counsel, was a cadastral map showing the southern third of my shoreline, labeled Temporary Community Recreation Zone, subject to easement. A completely fabricated overlay, formatted to look like it, came from the county GIS system. I stared at it, stunned. They'd faked it, not a minor tweak. A full-on counterfeit. Curtis noticed my expression and gave me a wary glance. I'll admit, this isn't the first time we've had creative filings from HOA reps. "Creative?" I said, almost laughing. "You mean fraudulent." He didn't argue. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own documents. A full property survey, GPS-tagged photos from the day I closed, and copies of the original plat recorded with the county clerk. Within 20 minutes, Curtis flagged the case internally as contested, froze the review, and submitted it for escalation to their legal review team. That was step one. Step two was much more fun. I drove back to the cabin and dug up every screenshot I had from my security cams, footage of Karen unlocking the gate, her HOA badge in plain view, the unauthorized fishing parties, the failed barbecues, all of it. I time-stamped and cataloged each clip, filed it into a digital folder titled Karen the Conqueror, and made backup copies on 2 external drives, one for my lawyer, one in a safe. Then I wrote a new letter. This one was for the HOA, and it was not friendly. I laid out the attempted boundary fraud, the fabricated GIS map, the illegal access points, the trespassing, and the harassment. I gave them 72 hours to respond before I filed formal charges with the State Attorney General's office for attempted land theft and document falsification. 2 hours after I sent it via email and registered mail, I got a one-line reply from Karen. "We are confident this will resolve in our favor through proper channels. KS." I read it twice, smirked, and forwarded it to Cheryl with the subject line, "These people are clinically stupid." But I wasn't smiling long. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the lake turned to glass, I stood on the dock and noticed something new. Off to the far east end of the shoreline, just barely within binocular range, I saw a group of people setting up lawn chairs, folding tables, a propane grill. I zoomed in with my phone. It was a flyer pinned to a tree. Woodhaven HOA, Community Sunset Gathering, 6 p.m., family friendly. They weren't backing down. They were doubling down. I got back to the cabin around 5:40 that evening, having picked up a trail cam battery and a spare generator from the feed store in Cascade. I hadn't even put the truck in park before I heard it. Music. Country pop crap. loud and proud, echoing through the trees like a honky-tonk funeral. I stepped out, stood still for a second, and let it hit me. Laughter, the metallic clink of folding chairs, the greasy scent of grilled meat wafting through the air. Then I saw the smoke rising over the treetops near the shoreline, like a beacon of collective idiocy. I jogged down the slope toward the lake, already knowing what I'd find. And, sure enough, there they were. At least 30 people spread out along my waterfront. Some were swimming. Others lounged in cheap plastic chairs with HOA-branded koozies around their beers. A couple of kids had set up a slip and slide right over my drainage path. One man in flip-flops was pissing behind a tree with all the grace of a drunken raccoon. And smack in the middle of it all stood a collapsible buffet table loaded with crockpots and store-bought potato salad. At the head of it, Karen, in a pastel blouse and white jeans, standing beneath a banner strung between two lodge poles that read, "Woodhaven Ho, Sunset Social, Our Lake, Our Right." It hit me like a punch to the face. The audacity wasn't even surprising anymore. It was mathematical. Escalate, provoke, document, push. They weren't just testing me. They were trying to break me. I didn't say a word. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and started walking the perimeter. Every face, every plate, every lawn chair. I made sure to get Karen in frame while she chatted with a man holding a clipboard, probably taking names for their next fake community vote. She noticed me and smiled like a rattlesnake wearing lipstick. "Oh, Matt," she called out, waving a plastic cup like we were at a neighborhood barbecue. "Didn't expect to see you." I stared at her. "This is private property. You are all trespassing." Karen's smile didn't even twitch. "According to our filed documents, this is an easement area under review. You haven't put up the proper signage, and frankly, there's a history of community access. We're just continuing a tradition." "You broke in," I said, gesturing toward the splintered gate I'd locked less than a week ago. "Again," Karen shrugged. "Maintenance access, for safety." I pointed my phone at the table of Jell-O molds. "Sure, looks like a safety meeting." That got her. Her smile wavered for just a breath. Then she turned to the man with the clipboard. "We'll make sure our attorneys are notified about the ongoing hostility." I didn't answer. I just turned and walked back to the cabin, pulse steady, recording the whole way. Then I called the sheriff's department. By the time Deputy Halverson arrived, about 40 minutes later, the sun had dipped behind the trees, but the party was still going. He was a big guy, quiet voice, and he looked more tired than anything when I met him at the gate. I explained everything, showed him the deed, the footage, the certified letters, told him about the forged map submitted to the county, gave him the names of my lawyer, my surveyor, my notary. Halvorsen nodded slowly, scratching something into a notepad. Then he said the one thing I didn't want to hear. "They say it's a disputed area. There's a filing in process, so we're technically not authorized to remove anyone unless there's a clear and present threat. You also don't have visible state-compliant signage posted. Just homemade stuff. You're telling me a mob can throw a goddamn party on my land because I didn't buy the right size font?" He raised a hand. "Not saying it's fair. Just that if they tell the court you've historically permitted access, it muddies things. Best bet? Document everything. File for a protective order. Push it through the courts." I clenched my jaw, nodded. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Did Karen call you ahead of time?" He didn't respond. That night, I didn't sleep. I backed up every second of footage, renamed files, labeled every face I could identify. Then I called Cheryl and said 3 words. "We're suing them." She didn't even hesitate. "Already drafting the paperwork." I ordered aerial imaging from a private drone service, marked tree lines, trash left behind, new tire tracks. I took soil samples where they dumped charcoal ash. I filed a complaint with the Department of Environmental Quality for unpermitted activity near a waterway. Then I printed one more sign and staked it in the ground at the top of the trailhead. "Trespassers will be prosecuted. This is not whole land, bring a lawyer," because if they wanted war, fine. I'd been trained for worse. I arrived back at the property late Thursday afternoon, after 3 days in Boise, dealing with the lawyer, the drone footage, and a very expensive conversation with a topographic surveyor who liked to talk about fishing more than property lines. I was tired. I was cranky. I was not prepared for what I saw when I turned off the forest road and reached the entry gate. Concrete blocks, not just 1 or 2. 6 of them, each the size of a chest freezer, stacked across the entrance like some sadistic game of HOA Jenga. Spray painted across the makeshift barricade in aggressive red letters were the words, "Social access can't be banned." I sat there in my truck for a full minute, engine idling, hands gripping the wheel hard enough to make the leather groan. My first thought, they were trying to trap me on a legal technicality. My second, Karen had officially lost her goddamn mind. I backed up, killed the engine, and walked up to inspect the setup. The blocks weren't dumped at random. They were laid down with intent, staggered and interlocked like someone had watched a YouTube tutorial on how to build a petty dictatorship. There were tire tracks in the dirt and the faint scent of diesel hung in the air. Somebody had dropped these here within the last 24 hours. I checked my cameras. Sure enough, time-stamped footage from the day before. A white HOA utility truck rolled in around 4:12 p.m., reversed into position, and 3 men in matching branded polos, one of them clearly the groundskeeper I'd seen at Karen's last social, unloaded the blocks using a rented skid steer. The camera caught it all in high resolution. Faces, license plates, even the moment one of them stepped back and admired their handiwork with a thumbs up. I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. I called Cheryl. "This better be a joke," she said. "Nope, they've escalated to full medieval warfare. Concrete barricades, tagged up like a Banksy tribute to HOA psychosis. All caught on tape." There was a pause. "Then, get a contractor with a flatbed and a forklift, film everything. We're adding property obstruction and vandalism to the suit." I hired a guy named Carl who looked like he used to smuggle tanks for fun. He showed up the next morning in a diesel-chugging rig, said maybe 3 words the entire time, and had the whole mess cleared in under 30 minutes. I tipped him $100 and gave him a 6-pack of decent beer. He nodded once and left. Afterward, I hosed off the graffiti, installed a new steel gate with motion-activated floodlights, and posted the video of the blockade being removed to a private YouTube link I sent directly to Karen with the subject line, "Nice try." That afternoon, I filed a new police report and walked straight into the county prosecutor's office with my lawyer and a flash drive of evidence. We laid it all out. Footage of HOA workers delivering and placing the blocks. Documentation of restricted access to my legally owned property. Environmental disruption due to heavy equipment on forest-adjacent soil. Graffiti damage. Intentional obstruction with the aim to interfere in an ongoing legal dispute. The assistant DA looked pissed, not at me, but at the sheer absurdity of what he was seeing. This is nuts," he said, pointing at the frame where the HOA employee does the goddamn thumbs up. "Yeah," I replied, "and it's escalating." He agreed to file charges for criminal mischief, trespass, and property interference. He also mentioned he'd forward everything to the state attorney general's office in case this became part of a wider civil conspiracy. Karen didn't respond for 2 days. Then, out of nowhere, I got another email. No greeting, no sign-off, just a single line. "Your defiance is causing unnecessary friction with the community. Please reconsider." I didn't reply. Instead, I printed it out, filed it, and added it to the growing stack of evidence labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. That night, I drove out to the dock, lit a fire in the pit, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, and sat in silence while the trees creaked. Around me, there were no kids screaming. No music, no lawn chairs, just the crackle of flames and the subtle shift of wind over water. It was the first time I let myself think, maybe I could win this. And the second time I thought, Jesus, what if I don't? The summons arrived with the morning courier, slipped into a stiff manila envelope, and stamped with the seal of the Valley County Superior Court. Inside, the official hearing date for my case against the HOA, 2 months from now. Enough time for them to pull more stunts. Or dig a deeper grave. Hopefully both. But the real shock didn't come in the mail. It came through a knock on my cabin door just after 9 a.m. She introduced herself as Julia Rand, a federal investigator with the Office of Property and Land Integrity, part of a little-known oversight division that I assumed had about the same power as a wet nap. She flashed her badge, serious and federal as hell. "I'm looking into HOA-related misconduct," she said. "Your name came up. May I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. Julia didn't sit. She stood with a military stillness, eyes scanning the maps, documents, and evidence I had pinned across my living room walls like I was planning a hostile takeover of suburban America. To be fair, I kind of was. "I've been following the filings from Woodhaven HOA," she said. "The fake cadastral submission, the concrete obstruction, the community event posted as a right of shared use. It all fits a pattern." "A pattern?" I asked. She nodded. "You're not the first. You're just the first who pushed back this hard and had cameras rolling." She explained that her office had flagged similar cases across 4 states where HOAs had attempted to claim non-member properties through procedural loopholes. Forged rezoning paperwork, manufactured referendums, falsified community votes, and in at least one case, threatening to have a home condemned unless the owner agreed to annexation. I felt the breath leave me. So they're just stealing land? "Rebranding theft as communal expansion," she said. Very civic. She asked if I'd be willing to cooperate with a wider federal investigation. Be a key witness. I didn't even need to think. Absolutely. We spent the rest of the day compiling everything: footage, drones, letters, screenshots, GPS overlays. Julia requested forensic analysis on the HOA's fake map, offered to connect me to a digital signature expert to trace the origin of their so-called referendum, and flagged one document in particular, a vote summary printed on HOA letterhead, where over 80% of residents allegedly approved temporary access rights through my land, except one of the names listed was a woman who died in 2014. Another was the name of a man who'd moved to Arizona 2 years ago and hadn't owned property here since. And the kicker: there was my name printed near the bottom under approved via implied consent due to non-response. Julia took a photo of it and actually muttered "Jesus Christ" under her breath. I decided it was time to go nuclear. The local Channel 8 had reached out weeks ago, offering airtime if I wanted to speak my truth. I'd ignored it then, but now, armed with fake votes, a federal agent, and righteous fury, I called them back. 2 days later, I walked into their station with Julia standing beside me and a flash drive in my pocket. We weren't subtle. The segment was broadcast live at 6 p.m. I laid it all out: the land, the faked maps, the trespassing, the party, the graffiti, the concrete blockade. Then I dropped the bomb: the fake HOA referendum, complete with screenshots of forged names and my own signature forged by proxy. Julia confirmed on camera that her office had opened a multi-state investigation into coordinated HOA land grabs and that Woodhaven was under active federal scrutiny. Karen, predictably, was unavailable for comment. HOA Legal sent a press statement calling it a miscommunication and implied that I had hijacked a peaceful local process for personal attention, which was hilarious, because the next day, 3 HOA board members resigned. One of them, a wiry guy named Joel, who once tried to hand me a beach use form like it was a candygram, left a voicemail on my burner number. I didn't know it was fake. I swear to God, I thought we had clearance. Karen pushed it through. She told us everything was legal. "Please don't sue me personally." Too late, Joel. The line had been crossed. No one was backing down now. 2 weeks after the live broadcast, I was sitting on my cabin porch, sipping bitter black coffee and listening to the sound of absolutely nothing, which was rare and beautiful, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't Cheryl. It was someone from the U.S. Department of Justice. The man on the other end introduced himself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Benjamin Krause, assigned to property fraud and white-collar corruption cases. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We've been briefed by Agent Rand. Based on the pattern, your case is becoming the centerpiece of a federal civil conspiracy investigation. I'll be handling the interstate coordination." I just said, "About damn time." What followed was a flurry of subpoenas, forensic audits, and witness interviews. Turns out Woodhaven wasn't a rogue HOA. It was a spoke on a much bigger wheel. Karen and her cronies had attended multiple regional planning summits hosted by a corporate lobbying group pushing for HOA zoning authority expansions under the guise of community resilience. Julia was right. My land was never the target alone. It was part of a nationwide playbook. Within days, federal agents raided the HOA's main office, seizing computers, paper records, and internal communications. Multiple laptops were found containing versions of template referendums, fake plat overlays, and even a manual titled Community Leverage Tactics: Expanding Borders Legally, authored by some HOA consultant in Texas who is now very likely sweating through his polyester suit. Then came the arrest. Karen Strong, president of the HOA, was detained during a scheduled wellness seminar she was giving at a retirement village, ironically titled Boundaries, Knowing Yours, and Enforcing Them. She was charged with wire fraud, document forgery, conspiracy to defraud property owners, and obstruction of federal investigation. Bail was set at $750,000, which her lawyer immediately tried, and failed, to reduce. She was remanded pending trial. The fallout: spectacular. Once the story hit national news, every outlet from ProPublica to Fox ran exposés on aggressive HOAs abusing obscure legal loopholes to steal or annex land from independent property owners. I was asked to appear on a panel about rural sovereignty and suburban overreach. I declined. I'm not a talking head. I'm a guy with a dock and a bad temper. Back in Woodhaven, things went nuclear. HOA members demanded refunds. A class action suit formed against the board. 70% of dues-paying residents petitioned to dissolve the association entirely. The remaining 30% probably still think Karen did nothing wrong. One morning, I got a knock at the door. I opened it to find a different sheriff's deputy, this one young and visibly nervous, holding a small envelope. Inside, a court-ordered notification that I had been officially cleared of all encumbrance, dispute, or easement claims. Not that it mattered. My land had never been theirs to touch, but now it was written in the ink of federal law. That night, I took the folder, the documents, and one last printout of the forged community referendum and burned them in the fire pit. Let the smoke carry it all away. Let the ashes settle where those bastards once tried to pitch lawn chairs. A few days later, I got a final email from Joel, the same HOA board member who'd left the voicemail weeks earlier. Subject line: sorry, no body text, no plea for leniency, just that. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Julia. She'd need it for her files. The land is quiet now. Not silent, never silent, but the kind of quiet that breathes with the wind in the pines and the low rustle of water against the dock. The kind of quiet that says, you made it through. It's been 4 months since Karen skipped her court date and disappeared. Word is she fled the state using a rental car registered under her sister's name. The U.S. Marshals issued a warrant within a week. Last I heard, they think she's somewhere in Oregon, hiding under a different haircut and a new name. Not my problem anymore. After the trial, after the headlines died down, after the feds packed up their files and left, I finally did what I had been planning since day one. I put the land to use. I signed a contract with a sustainable tourism company that offers guided nature retreats, kayaking, hiking, birdwatching, the works. They operate under strict terms, limited access, seasonal permits, zero tolerance for HOA-style bullshit. I'm on site for every group. I don't hide in the cabin. I greet every van with a handshake, a waiver form, and a warning. This land is private. It was taken once on paper. It won't be taken again. The gate is now a 12-foot steel barrier with facial recognition. I installed motion-triggered lights, cameras, and a backup generator system that could power a crime lab. Not because I'm paranoid. I'm just done playing defense. At the trailhead, I mounted a new sign, bigger this time, reflective military-grade polymer bolted to a concrete foundation. It reads, Private Property. CHOA not invited trespassers will be prosecuted or humiliated on camera. Yeah, I added that last line for flavor. As for the Woodhaven HOO, it doesn't exist anymore. After Karen vanished and the board imploded, the state revoked its legal status. What's left is a confused cluster of homes full of pissed-off residents, some of whom are suing each other for fees paid during Karen's reign of idiocy. There's talk of forming a neighborly council, but no one's rushing to step up. Can't imagine why. Joel. Remember Joel, the clipboard guy? He wrote again. This time, he asked if I'd consider speaking at a town hall about property rights awareness. I replied with a photo of my middle finger taken in front of my freshly paved driveway. Cheryl, my lawyer, says the case is now referenced in real estate law seminars under unlawful HOA expansion tactics. She framed the court decision and sent me a copy. I nailed it to the inside of the outhouse door. Julia Rand got promoted. Some senior federal task force now. We talk once in a while. She says my case helped push a new bill through Congress, one that limits HOA jurisdiction and demands external audits of referendums and property filings in non-member zones. They call it the Eldridge Clause. Cute. Sometimes I think about how close they came, how easily they could have gotten away with it if I'd just been a little more tired, a little less stubborn, if I hadn't had cameras, or a lawyer, or a backbone. But I did. And now, every time I sit on my dock, watch the sun rise over my lake, and sip coffee with no HOA anywhere within screaming distance, I remember exactly why I fought. Because freedom isn't a passive state. It's a damn full-time job.